Lately, I've been reflecting on and thinking about ceremony and the act of engaging in a ceremony. I know that this is something which is part of our culture. We see ceremonies for funerals and for marriages and for other different life stages. They're kind of a thing that allow us to show the world a certain transition that we're experiencing and engaging upon. And they have their significance. When I arrived in CSA, the Center for Spiritual Awareness, whom I was just noting there that maybe not all of you are familiar with Center for Spiritual Awareness. It's a center in Lakemont in Georgia in the United States, which was set up by royeugenedavis. And he offered teachings within the Kriyayoga tradition. And I had the good fortune of attending there for several summers in a row. For my first summer there, I arrived with the expectation and the desire to receive instruction in Kriya Yoga, but also to receive initiation into the tradition and to learn the techniques as part of that initiation. When I say initiation, usually the word that's tied with initiation is ceremony. It's usually an initiation ceremony. I had arrived at a quiet time during the summer, just at the early summer. It was in May. And so there was no retreats, no formal retreat being held. And so one of the other guests who happened to be on the grounds at the time, he had been attending CSA for many years, and he just said that, well, usually Roy will initiate people as part of a ceremony. And the ceremonies are usually held as part of a week-long retreat. But sometimes, on occasion, he initiates people informally. So I was curious to know whether I'd be initiated informally or formally. At that point, I hadn't actually sat down and talked to Roy. I'd only been there a day or two. But when I did meet him, he just told me to get on with my practice and to wait until there was a retreat and I would receive instruction with everyone else. And then at the end of that, I'd receive initiation as part of the ceremony. And then as part of the initiation ceremony, which some of you will be familiar with, there's a series of offerings made by the devotee. One is that they will offer up a piece of fruit or fruits. One is a flower or flowers, and the other is to make some kind of financial contribution. And these acts, which take place during the ceremony, have their significance in that, one, the flowers represent devotion, the fruit represents an offering up of your karma or the latent tendencies that you have, the habits that you have, to neutralize them and to work through them so as to allow for your experiencing greater insight. And then the last is the offering up of a financial contribution, which is representative or symbolic of your willingness to use the resources available to you for your progress as a spiritual practitioner. And all of these acts form part of the ceremony. And Roy had, I believe, followed in line with what Paramahansayogananda had done within SRF. The ceremony had been put together in a way where it was made up of a series of ritualistic acts. And then I was just reflecting on the difference between a ceremony and a ritual. A ceremony has this almost complete, systematic, organized approach to a celebration of some kind. And it can involve different rituals, but rituals are more specific in their nature. They're a specific act pertaining to a certain significance, something which is wanting to be expressed. And so this act that's being performed symbolically represents that which wants to be expressed, such as the offering of the fruit in relation to the karma. But the ceremony, that's a overall performance, so to speak. And often these performances can drown out the significance of each of the symbolic acts performed within that ceremony. So the ceremony is looked at as a whole, but the different rituals which take place within the ceremony sometimes can be overlooked or not seen for the value that they are hoping to denote. And then I was thinking about rituals, how we incorporate these into our lives in many different ways. I know for myself, when I started out in meditation, I had a ritual, a process that I went through in the morning before my meditation practice, which included the lighting of candles and burning incense and chanting. And I still engage in a similar kind of ritual. Maybe it's a bit more simplified. But these things that we do that form part of what we call our spiritual practice. And because we are making time and space to do them, we could consider them formal spiritual practices, as opposed to things that we just incorporate into our day-to-day activities. These are things that we set aside time. Sometimes we have to get specific materials, we have to create space, we have to use energy, and we allocate it to carrying out these specific acts. And these acts, these behaviors, these things that we do, that we engage in, why do we do them? To what purpose do they serve? And I think this is something which is important for us to reflect on, because there's a lot of things that we can inherit and take on as practices, which the meaning might be transferred to us or communicated to us in a manner which is quite abstract or unclear, or sometimes it's just a matter of us liking the actual act itself, but what its significance is beyond us. It's not actually registering with us. So the simple act of lighting a candle in front of a picture, this act, if it's the picture of somebody within your family or someone that you find represents a way of living that you'd like to be guided by, putting the candle in front of that person and lighting the candle is an act which takes specific materials, specific effort. And although it might not take a lot of time, it does take time. And there will be days when you do not do it because you feel you don't have enough time, even though it's something which can be done very quickly. But what is it that makes us feel like it's going to take up time? What is it that actually gives this act so much presence that some days we're unwilling to perform it because we think it's going to take up too much time? Now, if I just let a bit of space there, let it sink in, what I'm actually trying to get at is the fact that we can engage in ritualistic acts. Ritualistic as opposed to ceremonious. They're acts which have a specific symbolic representation, and we engage in them for that capacity to express something which words can't always articulate, which we're not able to tap into as quickly, except through the act. So when we take out the picture of the personage, we line it up in such a position on an altar or on a shelf or wherever it might be, and then maybe we're inclined to light incense, maybe we're inclined to rotate that incense around the image 2-3 times. Why are we doing this? What are we engaging in here? What's the purpose of it? And then we light the candle, and we might stand there for a minute in silence. But what's actually going on? What's it all about? What is it that we're hoping to achieve with this? So the ritualistic act is an act, a behavior that we engage in which has significance. But the significance of that act is sometimes not always easy for us to define or to express. And maybe this is something of the very act itself. These acts are behaviors which embody so much that is beyond our capacity to express, that we are inclined not to try and do so. But nonetheless, there is a significance there. Now, some people, and you may be thinking this yourself as I'm speaking, that these acts are a preparation for what's to come next. They're kind of built one on top of the other. And often ceremonies are created in this way, where one ritualistic act follows another, and they need to be done in a specific order. Because if they're not done in a specific order, then it's actually counterproductive. And again, we can get into the question of, well, why? What difference does it make if I light the candle before the incense, or light the incense before the candle? Who's defining this? Who's putting the significance there? And something I've learned myself through the years of practice is that the meaning that we apply to these things ultimately has to come down to us. And while we may inherit these practices from age-old traditions or from teachers which represent long-lasting traditions, our own involvement in them has to be something which is significant to us. Because if we're engaging in the ritualistic act simply as a copycat experience, something that we're just replicating, but we're not really feeling it or we're not really knowing why, at the beginning, this might help to just get us in a state of mind. But in the long term, it'll start to seem superficial, unnecessary. And so an act that we are making a conscious effort to engage in has to have significance for us. And so when those mornings arise or those times arise when we feel like, well, I can't do that because I don't have time, I'll just go straight to saying a prayer. I won't bother lighting the candle today. It's perhaps got something to do with the fact that in having to go through the act, that ceremonious, ritualistic act, that specific act, which has such significance for us, to do so in a rushed manner or in a manner where we're not actually able to connect with it, undermines its potency, whatever significance we have given to it. That significance can't be valued. And what this reminds me of is that when we try to express an experience to someone and we try to articulate it and put it into words and share with them something which is of meaning to us, significance to us, if they're in a rush or we're in a rush and we try to just get through it quickly, it doesn't really feel like we've given value to what we wanted to communicate. And so these ritualistic acts that we engage in are an opportunity for us to slow things down. And as quick as they might be able to be performed, our state of mind, our presence in performing them needs to be right there, right in the act. Because if it's not right there in the act, then the act happens in an instant and it feels like we weren't there for it. And then it just negates the purpose of the act. Now, I'd like to bring this back to meditation. Because in meditation, if we think of it like the ceremony, where we sit down for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, however long it might be, and it's a celebration. It's a celebration of our essential nature and who we are beyond the definitions of created, manifested life. And then it's made up of a series of acts that we engage in. And these acts will have been shared with us and passed on to us. And some of them we do, and some of them we understand why we do, and others we find difficult or less attractive to engage in, and others we like to spend more time doing. And so our meditation as a practice is made up of a series of rituals, if we want to talk about it in this framework. And these series of rituals, they are aiming to direct and guide us to be able to arrive at an experience which is otherwise not necessarily easy for us to access. At the beginning of our meditation practice, we chanted Om. We chanted Om 3 times. Sometimes I chant Om 1 time. At the end, I chanted it 1 time. Is there a difference? What difference does it make? When you began your meditation practice, with the guidance I was offering, you were guided to reflect on your intention and the purpose of your practice. This is something I do in my meditation practice, and I'm sharing it with you. How do you begin your practice? What's the ritual that you follow? And then when it comes down to techniques, the techniques that you use, which order do you put them in? Does it make a difference what order you put them in? Have you experimented or explored? A bit like lighting the candle or the incense, does that really make a difference? When we receive instruction from someone who's experienced in meditation practice, they can explain this to us. They can explain the different techniques of how one progresses onto the other. And that progression facilitates our being able to move deeper and deeper into our practice. They can explain how a certain technique is actually more pertaining to just relaxing the body, and another technique is more pertaining to going deep into the psyche. And so each act that can be performed when we sit to engage in meditation serves a purpose, but how do they relate to each other? And sometimes we'll sit down to meditate and we'll just feel like, well, today I don't even want to light the candle, don't want to light the incense, probably won't even bother with that technique. I just sit here. That'll be enough for today. And if we think then of the sequence or the series of ritualistic acts, if we've just bypassed several of them to experience this other one, is that okay? Is that not okay? How is that supporting us? How is it not supporting us? Does it make a difference to our meditation practice whether we've lit the candle or we haven't lit the candle? Does it make a difference whether we've actually chanted Om or we haven't chanted Om? What difference does it make to us? And what I'm pointing to here really is the question around where we find significance in all of this, where we find meaning in it. Because the only person we're sitting down to meditate for is who? Who is it ultimately that we are endeavoring to support and help? And with that question in mind then, the significance that we give to the certain specific acts, the certain acts that we engage in, comes right back to us. All responsibilities on us. So like we said, when we're in a rush in the morning and we don't have time to light the candle, we know that if we rush it, we're missing that instant where we get to enjoy the significance of that act. By doing it in a very speedy way, we're not actually present. And so what's the point of doing it in the first place? And in our meditation practice, there's a series of acts that we go through. But if we're not going to be present for those individual acts, what's the point in going through them? Because each part that we have put in place, it has been put in place because it has significance. And while we may have learned its significance, learned its importance, we continue it and we continue to engage it because of the significance that we ourselves give to it. So we're not sitting down and engaging in mantra because we've been told to do that. Initially, we might have done that because it's what served to get us started. But in the long run, the reason we're sitting down to engage in mantra is because there's a significance in our doing so. And we value its significance. And so as we engage in it, we are in the experience of that act. And then as we might move through mantras, it has been taught to us, we may move into experiencing mantra at more subtle levels. Maybe we've disregarded the mantra and now we're listening to the sound of silence, and we're sitting in silence and trying to listen to that reverberating sound current as it's just echoing in our atmosphere, internally and externally. And we're sitting there, but there has to be a significance to that act for us. It's not just something that we've been told to do. There's a significance in it. That experience, as easy or as challenging as it might be, as fruitful or as unfruitful as it might be, our effort to engage in the act in and of itself is something which is pleasing to us, satisfying, because the very significance that we give to the act is rewarding. As I was reflecting on this, when you're reflecting, things start to shoot from all angles. Thoughts pertaining to what can be said around this. And for you yourself, I'm sure that it's igniting and sparking off different ideas. And we like to personalize these ideas because our frame of reference for this world and how we're experiencing it is very much from this viewpoint, our own particular, private, personal viewpoint. And as I was reflecting on it, I was thinking that these acts that we engage in our formal meditation practice, in our formal spiritual practices, they're quite easy to delineate and to mark out and talk about and to measure, even in terms of how long they take. But if we think of our day-to-day experience, our whole day is made up of a series of acts. And these different acts are of significance to us. Otherwise, we're not engaging in them. And what I mean by that is we might be performing them, but if they have no significance for us, then although we're doing the act, we're not actually present. And maybe the act might be something that we don't necessarily find pleasure in, that it's something that's a bit more cumbersome. But maybe the joy is found in recognizing what significance it has at some level. And then recognizing that significance, or whatever level it might be, we're able to be there present in it. I'm just paying attention to the time here. I've said to you that I'll be speaking for 20 to 30 minutes, but I feel like I might be inclined to go over a little bit. Just because all of this, what we're talking about here, is in relation to our conscious awareness. And all of it pertains to the fact that our conscious awareness is being conditioned by the significance we give to things. And the greater the significance we give to something, the more attuned our conscious awareness is to that thing. And one thing that we are always engaging in, or which is always taking place, we're not necessarily always engaging in it, but it's always occurring, it's something which takes place, is thinking. And that process of thinking takes place. And we can find ourselves engaging in it at a very obvious level. And then there's other times when we only recognize how much we've become entangled and how engaged we are in it after a few moments of being caught up in this rabbit hole. And we pull ourselves out and we realize, I was just engaged in thinking. Thinking was taking place, but I engaged in what was taking place. And all of this thinking is conditioning that field of conscious awareness, that field of conscious expression. And so we give significance to thoughts in different ways, and it molds our conscious awareness. It conditions it. And this is made obvious to us, or becomes more aware to us at times when we open our mouth and we start speaking, and we start talking about certain things. So insofar as lighting the candle can symbolically represent something which is not necessarily easy to express, but nonetheless has a significance, or in the same way as saying a prayer at the start of your meditation practice is a way for you to articulate something which otherwise could be cumbersome or difficult to express. So the different ritualistic acts allow to express something which is of significance, to symbolize it. And there's no better way for us to symbolize the grey matter or the ambiguous, slippery, elusive nature of the thinking process. There's no better way for us to do this than through speaking. Once we've opened our mouth and we've said a word, that word is directly symbolizing and representing what was going on in our head. Now, just because we say the word blue doesn't mean that I'm saying blue in the way that all of you understand blue. But the word blue has a way of representing something which is of significance to me. This is quite a big topic to go into now. But what I'm trying to lead us towards thinking about and reflecting upon is that when we sit to meditate, and our objective is to understand the nature of the mind, whose natural tendency is to think, to have thoughts. And if we know then that these thoughts can be very slippery, sometimes we can be very overtly engaged in them and we have full cognizance of this, and other times, many other times, they're going on and we have no cognizance of just how much they're determining our experience. But as soon as we open our mouth, we say things that we don't mean to say. We say things that we would prefer we hadn't said. We say things using words that don't really sum up exactly what it is that we actually wanted to say. And there's all this relationship with language and words, which we use to represent and symbolize what's going on in here, that shows us how disconnected we are from the thought processes. But when we speak, it's revealed to us, and we're not always happy with the things we say. In our heads, it all sounds great. In our heads, the imaginary concept we have of who we are and how we deal with ourselves is very well represented. But as soon as we go to symbolize it in the ritualistic act of speaking, there's something which goes amiss and something which is left out. But nonetheless, when we say it, we're making an impression upon our conscious awareness and we're conditioning it. And it has an impact on how we are experiencing that moment. So for us in our meditation practice, our thinking processes can be very elusive, as I said. And what's the best way for us to be able to manage that slippery nature of the mind? We use our techniques. We use them in a way which is like a ritualistic act. It's we're performing behavior, an act, so as to give significance to that moment and that very act. And it's the act itself which is keeping us in that moment, in that experience. And so mantra, which has been referred to, uses word, it uses language, and it uses language as a way to condition what's going on at a mental level. So it's only focused in on those very words. When we take command of our internal dialogue, when we take command of it and we articulate at a mental level, we are then taking command over the slippery nature of the undercurrent of thoughts which can just be bubbling around. And that's a ritualistic act. We're actively engaging in something which is giving significance. This is the kind of significance that we want to be aligned with, and we're conditioning our conscious awareness to it. So rather than just going to our meditation cottage, sitting down and sitting in silence and letting the mind just perform, and that performance having its impact over our conscious awareness, we sit down in our meditation cushion and we engage in these ritualistic acts. And each act is aiming to condition our conscious awareness. Condition it so that it gradually, progressively moves away from its identification with the external and the different aspects of it, whether they be gross or subtle, progressively until it's able to experience just the nature of being in the act, and then who's in the act and what's aware of the act. What's aware of the act. So here I am using my words, endeavoring to articulate something which is of significance, something which has meaning. And your attention has been directed for the last 35 minutes or so towards this very thing of significance. It's been directed towards it and puts your conscious awareness in a space where it's attuned to that which is being spoken about. But like in the ritualistic act, the lighting of the candle symbolizes far more than words can say. And what has been spoken about for the last 35 minutes, although there's been many words, what's actually being said is registering at a different level. But your conscious awareness has been engaged in the act. It's been present in the act. And so ritual is being able to find significance in the act so that the act in and of itself absorbs us so that we can experience ourselves.